Yeah. Well, we're also going to be joined now by Jeremy Saland. He's a former assistant district attorney in the Manhattan DA's trial division. Also with me is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, former senior FBI official, and now an NBC News legal analyst. Chuck, I want to start with you. Give me an overview of what's been going on in the court today, especially when you look at both sides, but also, of course, the former president sitting there in court.
Right. Well, in the morning, primarily, Yamish, housekeeping matters and rulings by the judge on certain evidentiary issues. The government wanted to introduce what we call prior bad acts to show patterns of conduct or motive. And the judge, for instance, permitted the transcript of the Access Hollywood tape on that sort of rationale. Later in the day, after the lunch break, actually much later in the day, around 2 or 2:30, potential jurors started filing into the courtroom. They were going to complete questionnaires. Then they would be questioned on their answers. Those who felt they couldn't be impartial or fair would be excused. And from that initial pool of 100 or so potential jurors who were in the room, plus others waiting their turn, eventually the court would narrow it down to 12 jurors and 6 alternates who would sit in at trial as jurors in the case of People versus Donald Trump. Still a few days, maybe a couple of weeks off, but that process to pick the jury has begun.
And I'm told, Joshua, you're now with us, so I want to bring you into the fold here. Of course, she's been outside the Manhattan courthouse here. Talk about, of course, the history of this day, but really what has stuck out to you as you've been monitoring these procedures and all that we saw today.
Well, look, we saw just in the last couple of hours, after a lot of conversation between the lawyers for both sides and the judge, finally jurors brought into the courtroom. 96 were brought in. About more than half were dismissed after Judge Merchan asked if they were unable to be impartial in this case, to dismiss themselves, or if they were unable to serve for some other reason. So more than half dismissed. Then they went on with the actual process of voir dire, of asking the jurors questions from that 42-question survey, questions that include things like, have you ever read a Trump book? Have you been to a Trump rally? Are you a member of Antifa or the Proud Boys? Where do you get your news? So that is the process they're going through now. But it was a heated discussion between the lawyers and the judge today. As you know, we've talked about how this case may not be seen as quite as seriously as some of the other cases that he is involved with right now. But this is one that has some of the more salacious details, the details that he's alleged to have tried to suppress back in the 2016 election. So we saw almost immediately the Access Hollywood tape, that infamous tape, come into the picture, with the prosecutors wanting to submit that into evidence. The judge saying they cannot play the tape, but they are able to read from that transcript. Also, allegations that the Trump campaign and the National Enquirer were in coordination to try to boost Trump's image and to damage the image of his rivals in 2016. Because remember, while the prosecution is going to try to prove to the jury that he falsified business records in this hush money scheme, the other piece that they're going to try to convince the jury of is that he did so to try to influence the 2016 election. So they're trying to establish a pattern of behavior. And of course, Yamish, a lot of focus on the star witness for the prosecution, Michael Cohen, how to handle his guilty plea and how to really deal with his credibility, which is something that the defense will be trying to undermine and something the prosecution is going to be trying to boost, Yamish.
And Jeremy, thank you so much for that reporting. I want to also bring in, or we should bring back Jeremy. Jeremy, when you think about voir dire, the judge here has said that this is really one of the most extensive lists of questions that he's seen as a judge. What do you think about what's going on and the questions that jurors are facing in this moment?
You know, you have to vet him to the degree that he is, because the concern for both parties is that you're going to have a potential juror, and all you need is one for a mistrial or a hung jury, is that you're going to bring in one of these jurors, and that juror or more is going to be biased. And if it's biased and predetermined against Donald Trump, you also, as a prosecutor, don't want this biased juror that can ultimately upend on appeal your case if there's a conviction. So you have to ask these questions. We hear about the Proud Boys, from podcasts, from Trump rallies. What news sources do they follow and read? All this is relevant, and you may find in real time unlike a case that's run of the mill, if you will, that the defense and the prosecution is going to try to see, let me look at these individuals' social media. Let me see what they've been saying. Are they individuals that have some really strong, passionate feelings one way or the other? Or are they just regular folks who don't really even get involved in politics? So all of this is the time to vet those people and really engage them and try to figure out who's going to be a fair juror and listen to the evidence and not be someone we'll call that sleeper juror.
Chuck, if I could go to you, there's also this issue that Dasha was talking about with this Access Hollywood tape. They're not going to be able to play the tape, but they can read the transcripts of it, which means that prosecutors can read out loud Trump talking about grabbing people by the you-know-what. Tell me the significance of this tape to the prosecutor's case and what it means that they won't be able to play the tape, but they can still read essentially what Trump said.
Yeah, I think the judge, Yamiche, was trying to split the baby a little bit on this one. So there's a rule of evidence that permits prosecutors to put in what we call prior bad act evidence. I thought the tape, the Access Hollywood tape, was loathsome, right? Mr. Trump talks in disgusting terms about assaulting women for his own sexual gratification. Of course, the prosecutors want to play it, but they can't play it simply to dirty him up, to make the jury mad at Mr. Trump so they're more likely to convict on the charges in the case. But they can try and use that transcript, they were asking for the tape, but they can try and use it, Yamiche, in order to show a pattern of conduct or motive. The motive here, of course, is that the Trump campaign, when this Access Hollywood tape broke, was in some disarray. They had to react to the disclosure of the tape. They were sort of fighting a rear guard battle. It heightened the import of both Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, who had their own salacious tales to tell about Mr. Trump's conduct. So permitting the government to introduce, in this case, at least the transcript of that Access Hollywood tape allows the government to set the context, to explain the backdrop of the story. Under Rule 404B, it's therefore admissible for that limited purpose. The judge, again, trying to split the baby somewhat, is allowing them to use the transcript, which is fine and sufficient, but not allowing them to play the audio.
And Josh, I want to ask you about another issue, which is the gag order. There are prosecutors were pushing for Trump to be sanctioned. There's not going to be a hearing, from my understanding, next week. What's the significance of that, and what are prosecutors trying to really accomplish there?
Well, prosecutors are saying that he violated the gag order by sharing some Truth Social posts over the weekend. They point to 3 posts in particular and say that he should be fined $1,000 for each of those posts. The judge seemed to not want to deal with that issue today, but to get the jury into the courtroom. About 500 jurors had been waiting throughout the proceedings here today. But he says he will tackle that in a hearing next Tuesday. So expect that to be handled. And, of course, we'll be watching for that, Yasmin.
And Garrett, I want to go to you. There's this idea, again, of a gag order. How worried, how concerned is former President Trump about this? I mean, he's on social media all day today, talking not specifically about this case all the time, but definitely doesn't seem shy about violating this. Is the campaign or the president, former president, worried about this at all?
Certainly not yet, they're not. I mean, he's shown no indication of curtailing his behavior in particular here. I mean, he wants to go after the judge. He wants to go after the prosecutor, both of whom are still technically in bounds. Those attacks against Michael Cohen are the kind of thing that might get him in trouble, but at $1,000 a Truth Social post, I don't think that's the kind of fine that's going to keep Donald Trump up at night. Now, obviously, that could change during the course of this trial, but as of right now, neither he nor his attorneys appear particularly concerned about fallout from the gag order.
And Chuck, Garrett brings up a good point. Why not just keep violating this gag order, Chuck, and paying the fine as it comes?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question and such an odd case, right? You would hope on one hand that the judge wouldn't issue a gag order unless he was serious about it. You hope, on the other hand, that if he was serious about it, he would enforce it. The judge is in a very tough position, and Jeremy, I'm sure, knows this court far better than I ever will. But if there's a gag order out there, it's there for a reason. It's to protect witnesses and others affiliated with the case. And I think it's time for the judge to show that he's serious. He didn't issue the order for fun. He issued it so Mr. Trump, the defendant in this case, would abide it.
And Jeremy, we've been talking about this gag order that deals with, of course, what former President Trump is saying outside the courtroom. But he's also said he wants to speak inside the courtroom. Trump has said that he wants to testify. How likely, Jeremy, do you think it could be that we actually see Donald Trump take the stand here?
I think it would be incredibly foolish. You know, he would be a prosecutor's dream, if you will. The magnitude of things that he would say, going off script, if he can even have a script, alienating a jury, insulting, and just misbehaving, and not to sound like treating it as a child, but he would be his worst enemy, and it would be really a gift. I am fairly confident that his attorneys are saying, no, do not do that. There may be some value outside the courtroom because there's politics. Inside that courtroom, you don't want to alienate that jury. You don't want to look like you're disrespecting the court. That will never work in your favor. And I would just add one other comment. When you're talking about that gag order, what I think is important too, it's not the $1,000. Prosecutors are trying to get out in front of it now and say, out of the gate, let's get that first ruling in our favor that he's not following the law, so that if it escalates, we can say he had that opportunity. He was told, he was only given a fine. Now there's more real consequences. So there's a strategy here as to why they want to challenge us, even if it's just nominal dollars to Donald Trump.
Jeremy, I also want to ask you about just how long this is all going to take, especially when you think that the judges said something like 2,000 extra New Yorkers have been called to possibly serve on the jury because they want to have a really wide swath of people. How long of a trial could we be talking about here, especially as you're thinking about what both sides are trying to get out of this jury?
Yeah, well, first of all, for better or for worse, fortunately, we've got a lot of New Yorkers, so we'll fill that jury room. But this absolutely can take a long time because your run-of-the-mill case, if there's such a term, you know, something that's even a misdemeanor or a felony could take days. It's not usually done in hours. Here you have something that's far more salacious, if you will, and far more serious than even, you know, Harvey Weinstein's case that took a long time. And you have a lot of celebrity cases in the city of New York that take time. So I expect that this is going to be very methodical and slow. And if you may know or recall, Donald Trump didn't waive what's called his antimarchy right. So he's saying, I want to be present at any sort of bench approach or anything that's not done before the jury. I want to be part of that process, whereas many jurors say, or pardon me, many defendants waive that right to expedite things. But this is going to be slow and methodical. I will say, though, that Merchan is thinking this through and trying to say, if you don't want to appear on this jury and you're concerned, for example, your well-being, I'm not going to make you answer questions. I'll just release you. So he's trying to move this along.
Well, slow and methodical. I'm sure former President Trump does not want that to be the case, of course, given that he's now off the campaign trail. So thank you so much to Garrett, to Dasha, to Jeremy, to Chuck, all of you for getting us started. And coming up, we'll dive more